Great, so whatever happened last time, it wasn't a penetration test. Joe Sarkisian, with DenSecure, lead penetration tester there and a manager of a team of about 6 people. We do all the good stuff. This is my broader company, Wolf & Company PC, again, out of Boston. Big CPA firm. Some people might be wondering, like, why would you go to a CPA firm for a penetration test? This is killing me. Do you have any other inputs up here?
The only thing I can think is, I don't know if you're nearing your screen.
Doesn't look like it. Just only one input.
That's the only thing.
This is a new one. Never had this happen before. Great.
It's the best way to do it.
Guess so. All right, we're going to have to work with this the way it is. So about us, I like to say that we're a technical team that's like bolted onto the side of a 111-year-old CPA firm. And basically, we started a team, DenSecure, probably about a few months ago. We officially got our actual title. This is just going to keep happening. I'm going to talk through it. And basically, we do pen testing, we do advanced security assessments, which is kind of like our version of red teams. I mean, most people don't need a red team, so that's kind of our way around like being more goal-based, but not calling it a red team because we're not actually usually performing one, if that makes sense. We do app pen testing, network pen testing, threat emulation, social engineering, you name it, we do that. We'd love for you to come to us, but that's not why I'm here. I'm not trying to sell you on anything. So with that, let's get into why we're essentially here. So how many people in this room have ever had to buy or procure penetration testing services from a company? Okay, a few hands, smattering of hands. Okay, so you're gonna be interested in this talk, I think. So it's still poorly understood by clients and practitioners, pen testing is, which I think is kind of it's kind of strange to be like decades into this process and it's still kind of like not well understood on what a pen test is versus not. Getting it wrong has serious consequences. So if somebody screws this up and you have a false sense of security, there are vendors selling these services who do not actually perform these services. As some of the people who have had to buy a pen test before probably know by now. And it annoys me. You got another one? Great. We'll see. Now we find out if it's my laptop. Come on. Please. Hey, we passed 5 seconds. Awesome, all right. Now I can stop being distracted by that. So, whatever. Now it's my laptop, all right. So this tends to lead to the following things. Oh my God. That we hear from clients, like when we come in, right, we've had a pen test, or the client's had a pen test before. Now they're deciding like, okay, we're gonna use a new vendor, Wolf's gonna be that vendor, right? Now, what's their process like, right? So we find out after we've typically done that pen test for them, after the fact, we get these, some of these are the responses we get from them. But we let you in, we often get. That's not a realistic scenario. Our MSSP would have stopped you, which is one of my favorites. Why didn't they? This report does not adequately reflect our environment, but we're tracking that issue, okay? Our report was clean last year. What happened, right? Why didn't the previous vendor find this? That's actually probably my favorite response right there. Now, why does this happen, right? We do our testing. They had some like first Google ads when they searched for pen testing on like Google. I need a pen test, how much? And it's like $99 for a penetration test. you're like, perfect, that's the one I'm buying. I didn't know it was so cheap. What was my CISO talking about, right? So then we come in, we do all kinds of awful things to them, right? All in earnest. And they're completely flummoxed by this entire process, okay? So here's a scenario. Company A's regulators, right? How many people in here work in a regulated industry, like banking, healthcare, okay, a few hands. So say whatever the industry is, you're required to have a pen test, right? Or it's highly suggested, whatever it may be, right? The big wigs don't necessarily get security, right? So there's not a lot of budget for this. So the company starts looking, whoever gets put in charge of hiring a pen test company, right, looks for a cheap vendor. It's like, we don't have a lot of budget, CISO or whoever, top down, they don't get it, why we need this, but we need this, so we're gonna do it, right? So there are, my God. There are surprisingly tons to choose from at this price point, right? I mentioned the first page of like Google results. By the way, if you're gonna Google for pen test results, go like 4 pages deep in Google before you actually start looking for an actual company that's gonna do pen testing. Quick show of hands, is it more distracting for me to keep doing this than if I just talk through and look at the screen that doesn't stop on my end?
Just talk through it.
Just keep doing this?
No, ignore the PowerPoint.
All right, cool, awesome, I'll do that. So, company looks for a cheap vendor, like I said, tons to choose, well, all right, now I'm just gonna unplug. Tons to choose from at this price point, right? They pick the one that is closest to the cheapest, okay? Who wants to guess how this turns out? I love you. But we're almost to that part. And if you were looking at my slides, you'd see an actual dumpster fire going down the street in a river, but since I just have to tell you how it looks. So it's a dumpster fire, right, as you might imagine. So the pen test finishes, right, and the report looks like there's a couple of options for how the report's gonna come out, right? So there's either no findings, right, shipshape, or there's very few findings. How many in here have ever received a penetration test report and had to look through the results? A lot more hands, awesome, okay. How many times has that report had nothing in it but like a critical risk SSL like V3 vulnerability? I see a few more hands, okay, great. How many times have you just had no findings whatsoever? Anybody? Okay, so you know why they're giving you that SSL findings? Because they couldn't find anything else, and they had to put something in the report, right? So the other option, which is getting to my friend over here's point about the Nessus scan, clearly he's been burned, is you end up with a massive spreadsheet, like tens of thousands of rows long, that has everything that they found, and they dump it on your desk and say, clean yourself up, right? That is not a penetration test, right? That is a vulnerability. I wouldn't even call it an assessment. I'll call it a scan, because they didn't assess anything. They just ran a scan and gave you the results, okay? So now, company A has either a very false sense of security, right? Or they have new job openings because you just slammed the IT department, whoever's in charge of patching, whoever's in charge of asset management, whoever's in charge of all those different things, now has like 6 months more of work for no good reason, and they're looking for the next job at this point, right? Because you're making their life a living hell for no reason, which is not what we want. Fix it. No explanation, fix it. So why? Why did this happen, right? So I imagine you could probably figure this out. Lack of buy-in from the top, okay, leading to lack of budget to go with a better vendor. Probably didn't have enough time, if there's no buy-in from the top anyway, for the person who actually has to go procure the pen test to do their due diligence and figure out like who has a good track record, who does not, right? So that's part of it. So you end up with a bad vendor, right? And there's not gonna be any name calling here, right? Poor work, false positives, even worse, false negatives, right? Leading to, ultimately, a false sense of security and a possible breach, right? Because you have a false sense of security. You think you're okay, you're not patching anything, you're not remediating the infos that are actually probably highs, whereas the highs are probably actually infos from a Nessus scan, right? I'm sure people have dealt with that before. You're not doing anything because you think you're good. So surely this won't happen next time. And this is where I have a cute little gif of that same dumpster fire with a line that says next time pointing to it, right? So another scenario. Company B's regulators also require an annual penetration test. The big wigs understand security, so there's a solid budget for this. They do research. How many people in here, the people that have had to do pen tests, what was it? Was the method like I Googled it? Was it I already knew because I'd come from another place? I'm just curious if anybody has like what their process was for procuring the penetration testing services the last time they did it. Trial and error? Okay, fair. So anybody that's had a good one, what was that process? Did you send out an RFP, right? Did you go through people you know? I'm guessing you didn't just Google it, right? Okay. And luckily, we do have a good number of good companies that do this now and a whole lot more that don't. So word of mouth can be good. So they do their research. Maybe they send out an RFP, right? To some they might think might have a good track record, know what they're doing, are going to do quality work, right? There's surprisingly few of these to choose from. And everybody knows who I'm talking about, right? I'll name names, I'll name good names, right? So there's obviously the Trusted Sex, the Black Hillses of the world, all of these places. They're expensive, right? But they know what they're doing. So company B picks one that makes sense for them. Within their budget, not bottom of the barrel, probably not astronomically expensive, right? If you're not Fortune 500, Fortune 100, you probably don't need to buy like an astronomically expensive penetration test. And this turns out way better, right? Because now they don't have false sense of security. They know exactly where their holes are. They have buy-in from the top, right? So when you get that laundry list of criticals, highs, moderates, whatever it may be, they don't say, I don't believe you, right? They're like, okay, we need to fix this. We need to work together, yada, yada, yada. So option A proves risk, right? So the person who mentioned that they get the Nessus scan, right? Did that prove anything to you? Did you look through those results at all? Like, did you look at it and go, I can use this for actionable information, risk was proven to me, and now I know what I need to do to secure my network?
Well, it does have items, it's not everything.
Sure.
It's like a bunch of work.
Right. So was it hard to go through and kind of figure out what you should have prioritized?
I guess, I mean, you probably look at what's the quickest and easiest fix you can do right away.
Sure. Yeah, criticals, highs.
The things you take
Right.
more effort to tackle.
Right. So the reason I ask is because when I say prove risk, I mean, that's where we kind of get into difference like vuln scan versus pen test, right? Vuln scan, they do the scan. Ideally, if it's a vulnerability assessment, it's called that. It's not called a penetration test. And what they're doing is going through the scan results with you, pointing out things that maybe they think the scanner is over-prioritizing based on the risk level, under-prioritizing, right? They have that knowledge. They're going through your documents, your procedures. How do you track assets? How do you scan your network after you do patching to make sure that those patches and whatever remediation's applied, things like that, right? What a penetration test is they don't necessarily run a vuln scan, but they do prove risk by saying, okay, that thing that maybe a vuln scanner would have found, I'm going to actively exploit and show you what happens when I do, right? So that's a big difference between the two. So, good. Say again. Yeah, sure. All right. I believe you. I trust you.
Do you randomly
Why do you think I'm volunteering for AD?
He says it's secure.
I know, I gotta find him.
It doesn't help that the USB's name is Big Dark Disk. Nothing to see here. IT department, do not remove.
Here's that piece.
Thanks.
We're trying to figure out the power for it. Is that there? I have really good eyes, as you can tell.
Yeah, really.
Take this so you don't want to trip over that, right?
Sure.
Sorry about that, Joe.
No worries. Oh, it's still writing.
Hey,
There we
the
go.
Micro Center special.
No.
That man probably made it through World War II. See what we can see. I swapped the issue.
Okay, so this is up now. And then
That's Ethernet, if you needed that.
I don't.
It's on the other side.
Oh, yeah.
I'll do dance number. in the meantime.
Hey!
Don't say it yet.
Do you mind if I plug this in? Cool.
This is for the conference. So. It's only connected to like 8 jump boxes. It'll be all right.
All right. Sorry, folks. We're supposed to get new laptops soon. Now I have a reason to get on that. All right, I think we're about right here. Yeah, turns out well. Great. So I think this is where I was. So now we have validated useful information. It helps prove risk. Good decisions about budgeting for security, right? So there's a client we were doing a pen test at, and they were trying to figure out like what tools they needed in order to keep like defense in depth, right? So what they had is they had CrowdStrike, and they had like, I don't remember the NAC solution, but they had a network access control solution, right? So we give them the penetration test report. They detected 2 things the entire time. Who wants to guess what those were? When we plugged in the box to their network, right? And when we tried to dump memory from LSAS on an endpoint. It's the only things they detected, okay? So we give them the report, and they go, a lot of the excuses I showed you on the first couple slides, right? The things that we typically hear when they've had a prior year pen test that wasn't much of a pen test, right? And they say, yeah, but we have a NAC. I'm like, okay, so that helps you if somebody walks into your building with an unknown asset, plugs it into your network, and then leaves. You are a local bank. Ivan from Russia is not coming here to do that to you, okay? Not gonna happen, not your risk profile, right? What may happen, someone sends a phishing email. This was not in scope, otherwise we probably would have done this. Someone sends a phishing email, they download a malicious payload, now there's C2 outbound, that's more likely, right? Every single time I tried to explain some other risk in the report, they go, yeah, but we have a NAC. We had to let you in. And I'm like, that's not the point. Like, I just couldn't get it. I couldn't get it through. They're still a client. I love them to death. They're trying, okay? It's just like, doing stuff like this, because we were new to them, is what helps them understand these things, right? It's like, I understand you have a NAC, that's great. I understand you have CrowdStrike, that's great. What about all the stuff we did in between, right? Here's where maybe you could prioritize your budgeting decisions for next time. Maybe you need a password manager, maybe you need this, maybe you need that. Maybe you need a sensor on your network to detect anomalous traffic, right? Didn't have any of those things, but now they know, okay, maybe we should start looking into this. They had a decent budget, they just didn't necessarily know how to use it that well. Pen test helps, right? Builds confidence in the company's people, okay? If you're getting a pen test, those people should be working with you to be like, hey, you're doing a good job in some of these places, right? We're not just going to tear you apart tell you stink, and then leave, right? We're going to say, hey, you're doing this right? Your users didn't necessarily fall for a phish, or if they did, they reported it right away, right? You detected Nmap traffic. I can't tell you how many times I've been to clients and they don't detect network traffic, weird Nmap network traffic, which is really strange to me, which is another topic we're going to do in a second. It informs stakeholders, right? And it informs people about the esoteric aspects of security. We like to come in and try to put this in simple terms for people to understand, so that when we come back, ideally when we come back next time, they have a better understanding of why we do what we do. There is no option B because this went well. So now they have a solid reference point, right? They have a team that's bought in, which is the most important part, is that there's culture that starts to build here. And there's less likelihood of a nasty breach. Obviously, I'm not going to say you're not going to get one. So my kind of takeaways here. Do not shop for the lowest cost provider. We've been over this. You're not going to get a pen test. How many people here get a ton of emails if you're a managerial level or above, maybe not even, from these services that do automated pen tests? We have AI-powered pen tests, saw a couple hands. Okay, there's nothing necessarily wrong with those as long as you're augmenting them with a human version once a year, right? There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not gonna poo-poo it, but those things sometimes claim to be relatively cheap to use. I don't want to know how they look. I know there's one that's basically just who here is a pen tester? Is anybody here that's an actual pen tester? I see one hand in the back, 2 hands. You guys heard of CrackMap exec? Right. There's a tool that basically uses that and calls it something else. So it uses open source software and then does an automated pen test using it and calls it their product. If you look it up on Twitter, you'll find it. It's a huge heated debate. Look into the vendors you're considering. Right? We all know the Black Hills of the trusted sects, like I said, but look if you can't afford a pen test from them or it just doesn't make sense, right? Look into the ones you might be considering, right? So give them a call, right? Their salespeople will be happy to talk. You don't necessarily want to talk to the sales guy. You want to talk to an SME if they'll put you on the phone with one, right? That'll help you. Ask for references, right? If you ask, let's say you do an RFP, right? You send it out. Part of that, you ask for references. If they don't have any, that should probably be a flag, right? If you don't have a trusted client that you've done good work for, that they're really happy with, if they don't want to go to bat for you, right? If no clients are willing to go to bat for you, for whoever you're potentially going to buy from, it might be a little. I mean, they might say the thing of oh, we don't divulge who we were, but that in some ways is a cop out, especially when it's part of this process. Pay attention to communication, right? Do they ask any questions about your environment, right? When you do a pen test, ideally, after it's bought, the actual testers are going to get on the phone with their points of contact at the client they're doing the pen test for and say, tell us about your environment. What are you worried about? What keeps you up at night? What kind of scope do you want here, right? What shouldn't we do? Say again? Oh, I mean, that's every single call, right? If we're doing social engineering, whatever. Oh, you're saying it's being malicious. I see what you're saying. No, it's known, right? So we reach out, hey, we want to get up the scope call. You want to give us a call to verify us first to make sure we are who we are, right? But it's part of the process. We want to know about the environment before we start banging away at it. Has anybody ever had a pen test where it knocked down a network segment because they didn't know, they didn't ask questions about the network? Maybe a hand or two? Yeah, I see one. Did they tell you about their process? So who here knows what assumed breach is? Has anybody heard that term? A couple of the same hands. Okay, that's good. We talk about that, right? This is what it means. And that helps to alleviate the problem of, but we have a NAC, right? Because I'm telling you, I'm putting a device on your network to do this testing. We can test your NAC. I can plug that thing in, and if it stops me, great. Okay, now let me in and do my work, right? An assumed breach is somebody's already in there. So if we're using a box, if we're using a Windows host, whatever we may be doing, right, we're assuming someone's already in, right? So we're putting that in the report, by the way. That's going in the executive summary, so that when the executive reads it, They know that going in. Like, this isn't the massive dumpster fire you thought it was because you let us in to do the rest of the stuff, right? Do you know who's doing the work? Like, do you know who the testers are? I found something out the other day, well, not the other day, it's a few weeks ago. I was talking to another pen tester at another consulting firm. He's been doing it way longer than me. And he's like, you know, I'm really surprised that you guys like do your pen testing in-house. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, I'm pretty sure that you're the only CPA firm I can think of in this region that does not 1099 out their penetration testing work. And I was kind of blown away by that, right? So are you getting 1099ers, or are you getting people that actually work for the penetration testing consultancy that are doing that work and are part of a team, are wanting to be a part of that process, going over and above because they actually have that, they're gonna have that ongoing relationship, right? 1099ers, probably not so much, right? It's very sexy and snazzy now to say that you provide penetration testing services. So if you can just put like literally a page on your website that says, we provide pen testing, okay, but who's doing it, right? Are they vetted? You can't, it's kind of hard to be like, oh, we're gonna 1099 this work, but we're also gonna vet these people before they come in the door, that they're not actually some nut job that's gonna go hog on somebody's network, steal their data, et cetera, right? So I wanna go back to the whole list that I had at the beginning and kind of go through based on where we are now. Again, but we let you in. Process was explained up front, assume breach, right? That should take care of that question. Usually. That's not a realistic scenario. Well, if the last people performed a scan and called it a pen test, then you're 100% correct. Our MSSP would have stopped you. Did you tell them we're coming? Right? If not, why didn't they stop us? Okay? So this is where I go on my little MSSP soapbox rant, and I, again, will not name any names here, okay? Obviously, like probably everybody in this room, the company you work for, that you're working for, have some type of a security provider that's supposed to be performing some type of monitoring or blocking or SIM services or whatever it may be, right? It's ubiquitous these days. We do a lot of work for financial institutions, healthcare, some startups, but like all of these places are offloading like their SOC, their SOC, like a lot of their monitoring, detection response, things like that, right? There's a lot of times when we're doing very basic run-of-the-mill testing that has been known about forever, and it's silence on the wire from the MSSP, right? And we make that a finding. And we get some angry clients when we make that a finding. And the finding isn't, you know, oh, this is your fault. Why didn't you detect this, right? The thing is, you're paying somebody a lot of money to detect this stuff. Why didn't they, right? So what's the recommendation of the finding? More or less, pick up the phone and figure out why. Like, what are you paying for, right? Do you know what's in the contract? Do you know what they're supposed to be monitoring? Is it just domain controllers? God, I hope not. It's just member servers and domain controllers. Is it everything, workstations, whatever, IoT, whatever it may be, right? Now, do you have sensors where they're supposed to be able to pick up bad traffic, right? What integrations does your MSSP have on endpoints, right? Let's say you have CrowdStrike. Are they monitoring CrowdStrike? Who's monitoring CrowdStrike? Is it just like your IT team of 2 people that probably can't handle all of that, right? What are they being paid for? We had a situation where the previous CIO of a company had bought and had signed an MSSP, I think it was it's a long contract, it was like 5 years, right? Yeah, it was a long contract. This guy left like 2 years later. For those of you who are into math, there's 3 years left in that contract. The new CIO comes in, has literally no idea what's in that contract, doesn't know what's supposed to be happening. So we started doing the testing, and we're like, dude, there's nothing here. I don't know what to tell you. And luckily, they didn't get mad at us. They were like, okay, we're gonna pick up the phone. We're gonna figure out why this is happening. The part that sucked was that, unbeknownst to me, he wanted to have a meeting with the team and his team, and guess who was in that meeting with us? the MSSP. And now he's looking at them going, why didn't you detect all this stuff that they did? And I'm like, this is not a position I want to be in at all. That's happened a couple of times. But at least there's the conversation now, right? Now you can start to understand, like, okay, yeah, we're paying for something, we're not getting it. Where are the holes? Okay, do we have to pay you more money? Are we paying you money we're already should be paying you and you're not doing it? What is going on here? And let's try to fix this, because if we're there for like a week or two, right? What else is being missed for the rest of the year, potentially? All right, I'm gonna get off my soapbox now. And actually, no, I'm gonna get back up on it for a second. It's not always the MSSP's fault, right? Like, maybe they literally aren't being paid enough money, or there isn't enough sensors in place. They're provided what was paid for, and maybe the client needs to be like, okay, we need to think about upping this or changing something, right? Now that we're more mature, makes more sense, we got more money, more budget, whatever. This report does not adequately reflect our environment. Well, the previous vendor, did they ask you about your environment, right? Did they check in with you throughout testing to see, like, okay, I did this thing, did you see it? If so, is it an alert? Can you send me the alert? I'll put it in the report for you, give you credit, right? What I will say is that if I ask for an alert and you send me a rolled up 35-page PDF of just like events, I'm gonna hand that right back to you and say, thank you very much, this is not an alert, right? But there needs to be that back and forth constantly, right? Like during a pen test, like there has to be that communication, or that's where things break down. Clients get mad, they don't wanna come back, they're not getting value out of it, et cetera, et cetera. But we're tracking that issue. Status meetings should be taking place to avoid this problem, right? I shouldn't be providing a status. We did this, 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 and then like, yeah, but we gave you our remediation tracking and our exceptions and all that stuff. Did you read it? Right? That shouldn't happen. We have a compensating control. Okay, what is it? Okay, great. I'm going to take out the report now. I'm not going to hit you with it. Our report was cleaning last year, probably because you're company A, and you went with the lower cost provider. Why didn't the previous vendor find this? There is no good answer for this question from me. I have no idea. I can ask questions, right? I don't want to be put in a position to have to badmouth anybody that did, I don't know what the situation was. I don't know what the scope was. I don't know what the fee was, right? I don't know any of that stuff. But did they have a scope call with you? Did they talk about their process? It's an impossible question to answer. So questions to ask the vendor. We went over this a little bit already, but we'll talk about it again. Do you perform a vuln scan during a pen test? If so, what is it used for? There's not anything necessarily wrong with performing a vuln scan as part of a pen test, especially on a big network, but it needs to be clear what it's being used for, right? If they're asking you for administrative credentials to run that scan, are those credentials going to be used to do the pen tests? Because that's cheating. Holy crap, is that cheating? What's it used for? Do you attempt exploitation of vulnerabilities found? If they say no, it's not a pen test, period. How much focus is on AD and identity, as opposed to spending a week trying to pound a hole in our like hardened Palo Alto on the perimeter, right? Kind of a useless exercise in this day and age, right? Perimeters everywhere. Everybody's got Microsoft 365. They got VPN logins. They've got RDP. They've got all kinds of different remote gateways, right? Microsoft 365 to me is like one of the first places I go if I'm doing an external penetration test. How's your conditional access policy? Using MFA for everybody. Is everybody enrolled in MFA and required to as soon as it's pushed out or within X period of time? I was on a pen test recently where they had MFA, and they're like, everybody has MFA. I'm like, okay. Guess some credentials with a password spray. Go to log in. I'm presented with the screen that says, it's time to enroll in MFA. I'm like, perfect. Now I'm that person, because now that's my phone number going in, and that's account takeover. So there needs to be focus on that, right? Like this is This is the problem these days, is identity. Can we see a sample report? We have sample reports. A lot of good places have sample reports. Call them up, they'll ask you, and ask them for them, they'll just give it to you, right? There's no client data in there. They're not trying to hide anything. Like, this is our product, we're proud of it, this is what you get. We went over this. 1099ers, or are they actually employees, right? What kinds of ongoing training do they do? Right? Do they have a training? Do they have a good training budget? Like, what conferences have you gone to this year? Like, what are they? I hate to say, like, what certs do they have? But unfortunately, that's the world we live in, and sometimes that's necessary depending upon the type of organization. You have to be this type of accreditation, or all your people have to be OSCPs, or whatever it may be, right? What's your phishing process like? All right, so one more little soapbox. How many people in here think that click rate is the best way to understand how liable your people are to social engineering? Smart group. Not a single hand. Good. Clicks are clicks, but like, what did they do after that? Right? Sorry?
High-value targets.
Say a little more.
It's important to get high-value target information, like your executive, what's their click rate versus everybody's. It's better.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is a little bit better. What I do want to say, though, is if they click, people are trained to click, especially people in sales, marketing, whatever. They're constantly talking to people that don't work for the actual organization, right? That little external thing that says, this email came from outside of your organization. I don't care if it's in 112-point font, bright red and bold, right? Sooner or later, people don't even see it, right? Especially, like I said, the people that are constantly dealing with outside vendors and third parties, right? It's a part of a control, but defense in depth, right? So when they inevitably click on something, inevitably give up credentials, download something they shouldn't, fire it off, whatever it may be, what is the culture like, right? In order to, like, basically, like, I'm still going on a soapbox here. The culture of, can they report without having to feel bad about reporting if they get it wrong, right? People need to be able to report. They need to be able to put themselves out there and say, hey, I think this is bad. I'm trying to protect the company, right? So when you ask, what is your phishing process like? And they go, oh, we track clicks. We'll give you the click rate and who did it, right? It's kind of a flag, in my opinion, because you're not really getting much out of that. Like, of course, people click. I don't know if anybody was in the keynote talks this morning, but a whole lot of discussion about this was Snow's talk, which is great. That's my time, more or less. I wanted to ask if there are any questions. I know we're wrapping up a little bit early here. Anybody, anything? Don't be afraid. Must have been a good talk then. Sorry, go ahead.
So you were talking about how a lot of places do vulnerability scans, and I can say that when you have just vulnerability scans, like I worked for an operating system vendor, and we'd have to answer our customers when they'd say, hey, you've got some vulnerability in your software. And those companies that do that vulnerability scan without actually doing the penetration testing, all of our fixes were backported fixes. And so we didn't, it'd say it's version this, but it has the backported fixes in it, and then they were reporting that it was vulnerable.
Right.
And because of doing that type of scan, all it did was create a mountain of paperwork
Right.
that our company had to do and their company had to do to satisfy the regulations.
Right.
That said, go get a vulnerability scan, and it comes up with a huge list.
Sure.
So if you pay for a cheap service that's going to do that to you, you're going to pay with other things like your time, your vendor's
Yeah.
time, and other things like
That's a very good point. I don't know if everybody heard that or not, but basically the gist is if you pay for a vulnerability assessment that's not really, or you think it's a pen, basically you think it might be a pen test, but it turns out to be a vuln scan. Is that that type of thing, right? You're not necessarily proving risk, you're just handing over a spreadsheet because it's regulatory, like you had to do this, whatever it may be. It might be cheap to do that, and his point was, think of how much you're gonna pay down the road in wasted time, resources, pissing off your employees, right? Maybe, like I said, one of them leaves because they just can't take it anymore. Now you have to figure out, now you have to pay to hire again. That's not cheap, right? So just really good point. Sure. Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
How are your interactions different with more bureaucratic companies, like perhaps nonprofit or governmental organizations, versus when you handle like small to mid-sized companies?
Meaning, so the question is, how do we,
How it's received, maybe?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, so we do have that. Like, we'll get nonprofits and smaller companies like that, like, hey, we want to get a pen test, right? And it's not necessarily regulatory, it's just because somebody somebody there was like, hey, we have a lot of like sensitive information about people, we should probably figure out how we're doing, right? And the question, I think, is, how do they receive the results compared to like a regulated client? Is that kind of the gist of it? Yeah, so oftentimes they don't have the budget, right, that like a regulated place might. And so there's more holes, right? There's maybe a little bit more like paper shock, like as we're going, we're not just like not saying anything and then at the end of the 2 weeks being like, look at all this awful stuff, right? We're talking to them. But as it's going on, they're like, oh my God, I didn't realize, or this or that, you know what I mean? So it's like, but I will say that I think, and I don't know what it's a function of, but those smaller shops that like don't necessarily have to, but want to, are more bought into the process a lot of the time, like up front. If that answers your question. I mean, I just think if people are thinking about these things, then they're more willing to take the bad news that they think might be coming anyway in order to like get ahead of it so it's not a problem later. Go ahead.
You generally see more value in broadly scoped tests or narrowly tested.
When we have new clients, we'll ask them like, okay, like, how do you want to handle scope here? What's most important? And they're like, I don't know, right? And it's like, okay, that's fine. So maybe what works for you is we get on your network, right? If there's anything you're afraid that we're going to break, like, let us know. I mean, one of my colleagues is a big fan of like chaos theory, like testing. There's never the best time to test. If it breaks, it breaks. He and I go back and forth about that a little bit, depending upon the industry, the business, like what their uptime has to be, whatever, right? But I think that, generally speaking, new clients are much more like, I don't know, just like, let's start somewhere. Like, show us what the holes are. So like, it'll be a lot of Active Directory misconfigurations, right? Weak passwords, poor password policies, right? Minimum of 8 characters, bad lockout policy. Like, you can try 7 times in 30 minutes and then it'll reset, right? So like, password spraying is a problem on the perimeter. All that kind of like quote unquote, low hanging fruit is where we kind of start from. And then ideally, if they come back next year, ideally they took our recommendations, they hardened some stuff. And that's like, okay, can you check all that stuff again? And we've got this new thing over here we want you to poke at, right? And like, maybe it's scoped a little bit differently. And then like, ideally, over the years, you're going like this, and it gets more narrow, and it's like, okay, we're locked down here. Thank you for that. Now let's, as we grow and put new things in, test those things, right? Sure.
How do you test for inconsistencies with different pen tests? Like, you'll work with a company for year after year after year, but you'll get a different quality of pen test each year. So how do you test for that before?
So are you saying from, like, if let's say our team comes in after something like pen test company X has been there the year before, and then how do?
It's with the same company.
So you're saying when
When the same company comes in, they do a pen test, and one pen tester is amazing. But then the next year we get like a junior pen tester, and he just doesn't. Right?
It's funny. You're the second person to ask me that. Somebody the last time I gave this talk asked me that exact same question. The question is, how do you essentially like grow as a team? I'm gonna put this in slightly different framing. How do you essentially grow as like a pen test team where you might have like, some rock star do it one year, and then the next year, like, because we're growing and we have new pen testers, like, they have to start somewhere. So now you get the junior person. And if those results and the idea is, in a perfect world, you have a senior who is kind of overseeing the work of the junior, right? So it's like typical consultancy type of levels, right? You have like, so like, I'm the manager, lead pen tester of the group, right? I have a senior right below me who I kind of almost consider me because he's very good. He's got it all down, right? Then we've got one other senior who's a little bit newer, and we got a couple juniors, right? Those juniors shouldn't be on pen test by themselves, right? They need that time to like learn from us, to grow, to learn. And one of the most important things, right, is not the technical skill necessarily. Like, you can learn that, but it's like understanding like what's couth and uncouth when you're speaking to clients, how to talk about their environment, not to say in a finding like, oh, your asset management process sucks. Like, you're not gonna say that, but like, you'd be like, is very bad. Like words like very and weak and like there are ways to frame things in order to come across, right? So to us, it's like communication is huge with juniors. We're gonna be on scope calls with them. We're not just gonna let them, I shouldn't say this. I would be lying to you all if I said hiccups don't happen. Sometimes emergency happens, junior ends up on a call by themselves. Sometimes that's their time to shine, ideally, right? Things happen. But they shouldn't be doing all the testing by themselves. We're always available if they have a problem and they can't figure something out. It's like, hey, I've seen you guys do this attack. I think it's here. Can you help me out, right? So that when you get that report at the end of the day, it should be like anybody else on the team wrote it, whether it's like me, seniors, it should look just as good as any, like there should be no like good versus so-so versus bad. You know what I mean? Depending upon the person that did it. It should all be same good quality. Does that answer the question?
No. How do we vet for that? Being a customer.
Oh.
I'm looking for a company to do it. I've had good experience with you past year.
I see.
This year, you suck. You know, I got the necessary.
So something tells me that's happened to you before. Okay. Hypothetically, right? So I will be very honest and say I'm fortunate in that my team and our big bosses like don't want that to happen either. So like we don't just let somebody do like whatever they want the next year. They have the prior year report, right? And so part of our thing is you take the prior year report. And let's say there's management comments in there from the client, and it says, we will fix this by X date, this is the person responsible, whatever. Or here's our compensating control, we're gonna put that in by, I don't know, 2 months from now, right? Okay, we're gonna test that next year. And if you fixed it, and you said you fixed it, great. If you said you fixed it and you didn't, problem, right? So there has to be that level of like, even if it's a junior, they're going through the prior year report and making sure all of those checkboxes are checked before they start looking for other things. Right? And again, they're checking in with us as seniors, as managers, whatever, to make sure that they're not wasting time. They're not in a rabbit hole that doesn't matter, right? They didn't run a vuln scan and be like, I'm gonna exploit this Spectre vulnerability. It's like, no, you're not. Like, stop wasting your time. Is that a better answer? We can talk after. I'll be around. Maybe I'm just not fully grasping. Do I have time for one more question? Yeah? If there's one more question, I can take it. If not, you can end. Way in the back.
So I know that we've wrapped on DA scans. Obviously, we don't want to give DA scans as the pen test, but you are running DA scans as part of your process.
Unless it's asked for specifically, no. We do vulnerability assessments. That's a separate thing.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Thanks.
No problem. One more quick one. We good? I'll be outside after if anybody's want to talk. All right, thanks, guys.